How did I first hear of Anton LaVey? That larger-than-life character who created the Church of Satan in 1966, the very year I was born. As a teenager, I bought LaVey's Satanic Bible in my native Stockholm, in a general hunger for weird occultism and American pop culture. I liked his book. It was a no-nonsense primer in magical manipulation that also seemed to scare simple-minded people. Parallel to this was LaVey's fascinating life story, which included hanging out with the focus of my overheated teenage lust, Jane Mansfield. In 1987, my band White Stains released the record Sweet Jane, which was a tribute to LaVey, Mansfield, and to the relationship they had. Encouraged by my friend Genesis Peorage, I sent the record to the Church of Satan in San Francisco. I thought that was that, but it wasn't. I received a letter from Anton LaVey, not only praising the initiative, but also making me a member of his church. My mind gently melted. A mythic iconoclast had sent a sign of approval in my direction. And all I'd really done was to record a song with far too many words and some amazingly out-of-tune electric guitars. In 1989, I went to San Francisco for the first time. I met Anton LaVey, or Dr. LaVey as his friends called him, and his beautiful partner Blanche Barton at the infamous Black House on California Street. We had a late dinner and then went back to the house to talk and watch old movies. Inside the kitchen was a setup with synthesizers that he more than willingly played like a gleefully sinister character out of a Ray Bradbury sideshow story. And in the basement was a bar he called the Den of Iniquity, permanently frequented by mannequins he had constructed himself. When I stumbled out into the other reality again, it was 6 a.m., and my mind was reeling with anecdotes about Eddie Cantor, Todd Browning, Ben Hecht, Archie Mayo, and, of course, Jane Mansfield. The following evening, the same thing over again. More stories, more music, more movies. I returned for more of the same every year up until 1994, when LaVey and Barton had become proud parents of a boy named Xerxes. Some years later, in 1997, the great Shandor sadly passed on to the infernal regions. He had been somewhat of a recluse during this last decade of his life, yet some people were obviously invited into his devil's den. Some I got to know early on, others much later. I always wondered what their stories and their emotions were. So I decided to find out.
I had been drawn to witchcraft and magic, and but I'd seen the Satanic Bible, and I saw this strange guy on the back that looked kind of intimidating, and I thought, oh, well, you know, he looks kind of full of himself. I thought maybe he doesn't really understand that continuum the same way I would see it. So I took it and I put it back. I took it up, put it back. And so finally a book called The Devil's Avenger came out in 1974, the first biography of Anton LaVey. And it talked about his lion. It talked about his history in the police department and in the carnival and in the circus. He's worked with a lot of lions. He had a lion and the animals and tigers and his love of life and his disdain for the oppression and the prejudice that can grow out of conventional Christianity. And I certainly understood that. I read the satanic statements there, and I read about other people who were aligned with his philosophy, and it just seemed to make a great deal of sense to me.
Well, I guess my very first recollection of that, and it was a long time ago, it was probably when I was maybe 13 or 14 years old, and I discovered the Satanic Bible. And of course, him being the author, you know, to me was, well, who is this man? Where did he come from? And how did he get the balls to write such a blasphemous, incredible work?
It was more of an aha moment. Like, this is somebody that, wow, this is somebody that thinks the way that I've thought my whole life, you know, more than a discovery. It was sort of a recognition of a kindred spirit. And I read all of those books, and then I read The Devil's Avenger by Burton H. Wolfe, which is another book that he had. And then I became fascinated by the doctor himself and the amazing life that he'd lived.
This must have been 1973, 74. And the Satanic Bible was for sale at my high school book fair. And I was intrigued by it. And I had heard of, actually, prior to that, I remember Anton LaVey on the cover of Look magazine and reading the article about the Church of Satan.
He's been a part of the culture my entire life. He kind of, I happened in 1960, and he was happening in the mid-60s. So he turned up in a lot of things and places in the world, and I think that he seemed interesting to me, and even before I knew much about him, he was just sort of a part of the culture.
That book rack was there, and that Satanic Bible was turned towards me. So I picked it up again and looked at it and then started reading some of it. And I was immediately felt not only an excitement at the tasteful drama that it had, but the principles resonated with me just in this cursory glance, looking through the Book of Satan and then reading a little bit of the other essays just as I'm standing there and waiting online. So I said, I've got to take this home. I've got to get to read this whole thing because makes me very curious, and certainly not like other religious scriptures. So when I got home, I read it that night, and beforehand I'd considered myself a skeptical materialist atheist, and then I now added the much more appropriate definition of Satanist to myself, and that was the beginning.
When I moved to San Francisco, I made a point of meeting him, and it was not that difficult for me to do so. And he invited me over to his, what was known at the time as the Black House, which unfortunately has been torn down, no longer exists, at 6114 California Street, where he had his pet lion in the basement. And eventually, the roars of the lion at night disturbed his neighbors, and he was forced to donate the lion to the San Francisco Zoo.
I went out to dinner with Anton LaVey. I met him, I shook his hand, and as I've said before, I didn't know what to expect. You know, you don't know whether he's going to be a pompous asshole or really full of himself, sweep into the room in his long black cape and here, kiss my ring or something. But he wasn't. He was pleasant. He was funny. He was genuine. He was joking. He knew music and references that movies that I knew and that was familiar. And then we went back to his place and he played music the way that I would hear it in my head. He just. And that was a gift that he had, was he could connect with people through music. That was one of his magical abilities. He knew people and he knew music. And someone would walk into the room and he'd pluck a song that I knew he hadn't played since I'd known him. And it was, they would say, I haven't heard that song since I was 10 years old, and they'd fall in love with him, and so yeah, I was mesmerized, and he said, he wrote me a letter, He said, you will be in San Francisco. You know, you're needed here, and you will come here.
I was the editorial director of a group of men's magazines, High Society and Cherie and even Playgirl for women and a bunch more, which, you know, kind of fits with everything. And I decided that I wanted to do a feature story on Doctor. So I get the date settled, and I get on a plane to San Francisco from New York. I get to the airport, and I grab a cab, and I give him the address of Doctor's house. So it was an African-American cab driver. I said, "You sure you want to go here?" I said, "Yeah, we get to the house. I barely shut the door and gave him money, and he was out of there." He knew Doctor's house, and he knew the Black House, and he knew what was up to. But that was kind of funny.
I don't really know from their side of it if they were looking for somebody to help with that. It seemed to happen very quickly. Then when I went over there, and you know, the first couple of evenings we spent a lot of time talking, and as you know, he would play keyboards and tell wonderful stories, and at some point in the evening we'd watch a movie or several movies and we just all got along really well. It was a really good fit, and I don't remember exactly when it became an official thing that I was to work there, but probably after the first few times that I went over.
In 1990, I moved to San Francisco, and the people that I was hanging out with knew him, and eventually we were invited over to the famous Black House. So we started to go over and hang out once in a while, maybe one night every 3 weeks or something. And I would bring my projector and show 16 millimeter film, so I was always on 16 millimeter, and he had a lot of 16 millimeter hanging around. And I remember one night after the movie, we all got in his van, and Blanche, and we drove to an all-night diner in the Sunset District. So that was hilarious and great. It was a great experience, like being up at 3 o'clock in the morning with him, driving through the streets, deserted streets.
I had first been working as the research director at Hustler magazine, and we had done an interview with him, and as the research director I was responsible for the factual accuracy of all printed material in all Larry Flynt publications. So I had a staff, but I wasn't going to hand this one to anybody because I had known who he was for so long, and so I ended up not ever speaking to him. I ended up speaking with Blanche Barton, who became a very good friend, and then through another set of circumstances with another friend, I kept hearing, "Oh boy, LaVey would really love you," and "Oh, LaVey would really love you," and I'm like, "Dude, set it up." And so eventually it got set up, and it was delightful. I mean, we were instantly fast friends, and it was just wonderful. So it was one of those friend of a friend things.
When you got to know him, he knew carnies, he knew magicians, he played the organ regularly at the Philosophers Club. He was at one point the only registered theremin player in the Musicians Union in San Francisco. He was a really interesting guy who had lots of interests and lots of passions, and he just sort of got pigeonholed into, "Oh, well, yeah, Mr. Satan, Church of Satan, boom, that's it," and everything else kind of doesn't get talked about, and that to me is the most fascinating thing about him.
And I mean, already they appointed me as a representative pretty much right away, because they saw that I understood everything, and they said, you know, you can go out and talk about our philosophy to people and media and whatever. So like even before meeting me in person, they had sort of taken that leap of trust with me. So we went out there, and our first meeting was to meet at Izzy's Steakhouse, that wonderful restaurant. And when we got there, we took a cab. We were staying at the Press Club because Blanche suggested that. She said, "Oh, it's, you know, very reasonable, and it's old and musty and kind of has history. You don't want to stay in any just regular hotel. Like, this would be very cool." And it was really kind of awesome. It had like a stinky old pool and like the cat clock on the wall, and our room had the map of the world behind the headboard that was old, yellowed and peeling. It was just amazing. It was like being some kind of Indiana Jones thing going to the Press Club. But we got dressed and went into Izzy's, and when we went in the door, suddenly we heard a voice boom out, "Peter Gilmore and Peggy Nadramia!" And there he was, Anton LaVey with Blanche perched on a stool, sipping. I think it was a martini, and that was how we started. And we had a little drink and then moved to a table and then started a conversation that didn't end until like the next morning. After he had actually driven us around San Francisco to show us the city in the middle of the night, and then back to the Black House to continue a really in-depth conversation.
Being exposed to him, like, living in the house, sometimes we'd be there for a whole week. We got to see him like on a daily basis and got to see like the guy he really was, and he wasn't always putting up, it wasn't like a state occasion every time we saw him. And yeah, I feel like we did get closer. He certainly wasn't a perfect person. He had his moments, he had his little outbursts and things that would annoy him and bug him and tire him out, and but certainly, as we know, all our friends have their moments where you see the good and bad in them, and the things that their flaws and the things they work to overcome.
So here I am in front of the Church of Satan. It's 5 minutes to 8. The fog's rolling in. It's real cold and very atmospheric, And I'm checking my watch every minute just to make sure it's like 8 o'clock, and then I press the buzzer. Just as I pressed the buzzer, a white van drove up right alongside of me, and the passenger door opened, and it was Anton LaVey. And he came right up to me and he said, "Larry." And he stuck out his hand and he said, "At last we meet."
To fully understand the satanic philosophy, we have to begin right here, with a very young Tony LaVey growing up in San Francisco. Playland at the beach, right by the famous Sutro baths, and the great Golden Gate Exposition on Treasure Island. Like most kids, LaVey enjoyed the rides, the calliope music, the sideshow attractions, people indulging in fun, fantasy, and aesthetic escapism. For the slightly older folks, there was the sexual thrill of the girly shows, and the constant feeling that you were promised considerably more than you actually got. This imprint was so strong that the young LaVey later joined both circus and sideshow, as musician as well as performer with the big cats, lions and tigers. Not only did he enjoy the work, he was also daily taught lessons about human psychology. People need to let off steam, and they're more than willing to pay for that pleasure. His interest in the occult merged with these insights, and he now felt that there was only one symbol powerful enough to contain his personal philosophy.
To me, Satan represents everything that is not only rebellious, but pioneering and achievement-oriented and critical, cynical, questioning.
He had a very specific sort of a concept of Satanism as being an examination of how all of the things that people do enjoy have by religion been made satanic. And so his perspective was everything I like to do is satanic, then damn it, I'll be a Satanist.
He validated the idea that a religion can be fun, and a religion can be uplifting and without guilt, and celebratory without penance. So that's an amazing thing to say, yes, my religion is Satanism, and it's because I love life, and I live every minute of life, and this is where it is, and we only get one time around.
He is so difficult to fit into the pastiche of occultism in America because he didn't really belong to any clear, identifiable, intellectual family tree. He created his own family tree, in a sense. He reached backwards to primeval philosophy. He reimagined the idea of the satanic in a way that had historical integrity, but was also new, I think, in terms of the Western, modern, media-saturated world. And he embraced aspects of carny culture. He embraced aspects of performance culture. He embraced aspects of the horror movie and the Gothic cultures. And he brought his own aesthetic sensibility to it all and wrapped it up in this neat, wonderful, infernal package.
I'd say unchristian more than anti-Christian, because I feel anything, if it works for people, is what they should go for. If they find that it gives them solace, if it gives them something in the way of a belief system to keep themselves going, and they're staunch Christians, fine, it's all right with me. I'm not going to try to steal them from their belief or try to convert them, because if it works for them, it's all right. But you see, alternatives are sometimes very threatening, and Satanism is an alternative.
LaVey was somebody who was much more in tune with the reality of human nature and the gray areas of existence, which is really where everything happens. And he knew that, and that's why, that's the real secret, I think, to his philosophy, that it's a Lebensphilosophie, like Nietzsche talked about, which it can actually be lived by human beings because it's not contrary to human nature, whereas most of these big religions have set something up which is almost impossible to fulfill. It's contrary to human nature in many ways, and LaVey was good at eviscerating that kind of hypocrisy.
Well, Anton LaVey affected pop culture very specifically in bringing out this idea of the devil as having some kind of active symbolic presence, that he'd wear the horns, the horned headpiece and his red-lined cape, and would cavort with nude altar women and saying occult words like Shem Hamfarash, and then saying Hail Satan, and no one had said Hail Satan before. That was not part of the culture. Like, that suddenly became part of the culture. He gave a context to a sort of ritual that was literally satanic, not just the Our Father backwards or some kind of simple blasphemy or blasphemous inversions of Christian practice. He created a positive satanic practice which hadn't existed before. And that inspired so many people that when you thought of Satan, even though it was part of history, you can find the way Milton handled Satan, and you could find, Byron's dealings with that. You can look through art, imagery, Dory's images of Satan, and Blake. All of these people in the past, all these romantics of sorts, were satanic in that they would look at the figure of Satan as something positive and about self-liberation and self-glorification. And he tied into all of that, but he brought it into a contemporary American setting so that it wasn't always looking at some musty old thing where you were looking at some old etching or we're reading some old poem. Suddenly here was something fresh and very active. And then by him doing interviews and doing videos like Satanis and appearing on these different interview shows, suddenly there was this man who looked like the devil, to the popular culture, and was talking about Satan as this positive role model.
Artificial human companions, total environments, seeing through the film of religion and not respecting the Catholic Church or Christianity and the machine that has represented it for 2,000 years as sanctified and holy and the only giver of life and truth. On the contrary, we're finding out more and more and more despicable, vile, disgusting things that have happened in the name of Christianity and protected by the hierarchy.
I think, he felt strongly that church and state need to be separate, that we can't keep going with a country that's founded on these kind of loosely based biblical proclamations. We need to understand that everybody's got a different religious bent, and that's exactly why it needs to be kept completely separate from our laws and our legal procedures.
He did bring an end to that kind of prudishness. He brought forth the idea of indulgence over abstinence, which is our first principle, that Satan represents indulgence, not abstinence. And it's just about embracing life and taking life and wringing out every last bit of whatever you want. He didn't care much for hippies. But I can see why. Because the hippies were about unconditional love, and Satanists are about purely conditional love. I don't love you because I have to. I love you because I want to.
He saw that people were wringing their hands and making a lot of to do and gaining political power, societal power through the poor me syndrome. And we see this manifesting everywhere now, worldwide, and people are acknowledging it as the cult of victimization. But Anton LaVey was the one at the forefront of recognizing it, along with the invisible war. That was another sort of socio-political concept that he had and that he pioneered, as far as that there are people trying to manipulate you, there are people trying to get at you in so many different ways. And now with the internet, it's no longer an invisible war. It's right out there in front of us.
In many ways, his philosophy and the Satanism as a way of looking at the world was a completely postmodern thing, which, regardless of your opinion about postmodern theory or things like that, there's something absolutely to it, in the sense that we live now in a time where we can see so much of the past, and basically the rules have been broken for better or worse. We no longer live in traditional societies, and you can actively pick and choose and create your own reality based on the things that resonate with you. And LaVey was completely in touch with that and aware of that and advocated that.
Early 1960s. Anton LaVey's interest in magic grew. He was established in his black house and held lectures and classes. Topics could range from vampires, werewolves, freaks, the Black Mass, death, ghosts, Gothic culture, and many other things. The great Jandor spellbound his visitors. As his magic circle of friends and allies grew, what happened then seemed inevitable. In 1966 he founded the Church of Satan, and in 1969 the Satanic Bible was published. Media attention was massive. From men's magazines focusing on the nude ladies and the sexual rituals, to mainstream magazines focusing on the alarming resurgence of non-Christian allegiances.
For victory is the basis of right. Cursed are the vanquished, for they shall be vassals forever. Blessed are the iron-handed, the unfit shall flee before them.
Former New York socialite Judith Case and John Raymond are joined by Satan in unholy wedlock before a live altar, a nude redhead. Self-ordained sorcerer minister Anton LaVey presided at the San Francisco ceremony. As the worst man looks on, the blessings of Lucifer and Beelzebub are invoked. The elaborate rites smack to publicity because next day the bride and groom secured a conventional wedding license.
LaVey basked in the attention and wrote the books The Complete Witch, or What to Do When Virtue Fails, and The Satanic Rituals. Beneath all the scandalous exposure was also a serious magician who wanted to break away from dusty, arcane, esoteric systems basically stemming from medieval times. LaVey came up with new magical concepts based on psychological insights gained as much from the carnival as from Sigmund Freud, as much from playing the organ at dive bars as from Friedrich Nietzsche. Active psychodrama, the use of sex, creating your own temple space by indulging in whatever gives you most pleasure, creating artificial human companions instead of wasting time on dull acquaintances, and definitely integrating a dark sense of humor in all of these things he now presented as Satanism.
The ideal satanic society would be a stratified society, a society in which each individual would be free to live within a total environment of his or her own choosing. Experiments have been conducted which have been proven to be not only workable but highly successful. Disneyland, Disney World, Epcot Center. We know the type of effects these can have on people who wish to be able to not only play a role but live out a role in their chosen lifestyle that is most conducive to happiness. Any who would enter such total environments who cannot conduct themselves in accordance with the rules, the regulations, the tenets of these environments would be excluded.
There were all kinds of ideas that he put forth in his essays, and when you'd speak to him, that are absolutely relevant and more relevant than ever. One concept that I think is like that is the good guy badge, which is an interesting phenomenon. And the more you have, in many ways, a secular society, you see it more and more. It used to be the religious figures were sort of wearing the overt good guy badge, whether it's the collar or the robe or whatever. But now it's more of a sort of socio-political thing, and I think you see that affecting America absolutely, and much of Europe as well, and it's probably going to keep spreading with people who sort of have a one-way opinion of what's correct and proper thought, behavior, and it's always cloaked in a kind of moral garb, and that's what the good guy badge is. And of course these good guys are rarely good guys in their private lives, and I think we're seeing that now, and they often are behaving in exactly the ways that they claim they're fighting against. So I think he was very perceptive about those kind of foibles of human behavior and human psychology.
He said to me once that the animals should be our gurus. And what he meant by that was that we should observe them when we want to know like what our real priorities should be. Like animals have their priorities, and they're oft quoted, they don't lay awake at night and weep for their sins. And I think he felt very strongly that when we're worried about whether or not a thing is important or not, well, would an animal think that was important? Would an animal, make that choice? Of course not. And I think that's, he really, strongly felt that, we have this feral nature in us, and, we have the intellectual capacity to be incredibly vicious, but we also can use that capacity to refine our impulses in a direction that is helpful for us and will help keep our species alive and our planet alive, and that animals don't do these self-destructive things. They don't destroy their environments, and we really need to keep that in mind.
He wrote another essay, I believe it's in the Devil's Notebook, about don't bathe, and he was a big believer in people being natural, and if you douse yourself in perfume, not only is it going to stink and alienate a lot of people, but it's not any woman could wear, any man could wear that scent. So if you're trying to establish a relationship with someone that's exclusive attraction to you, you don't want to smell like 30 million other people. You want that unique scent to be associated with positive things in you.
Well, years ago when I was in San Francisco, I was very fascinated with artificial human companions. I worked as much as I could day and night to fabricate people that would be more interesting, more stimulating, more enlightening, and certainly more palatable easier to get along with than real flesh and blood human beings. Everyone will be able to have a real companion, custom made, in the ideal imagery of his or her desires. I think that's going to be great, because everybody wants to feel better than somebody else. I would say that satanic music is music that elicits a gut reaction, music that sends shivers up somebody's spine, the kind of music that, well, everyone has heard sometime in his or her life, that really gets them thinking or feeling about something, regardless of who's playing the music or where the music is being played. That's satanic music.
So one of the things that Dr. LaVey would do is we'd sort of hang around and talk until very early in the morning, and then we'd go to bed. And then we would sort of say, well, later on when we all wake up, we'll all get back together again. But sometimes I would hear that he would sneak down to the kitchen while we were all supposed to be asleep, and he'd practice things. And when I was there, he'd be practicing Wagner and Liszt and Beethoven, because he knew I liked those composers, and he really wanted to satisfy me and show me that he knew them and could play them with the sort of gusto that he brought to the Tin Pan Alley tunes and other old popular songs that he'd discovered and would want to play. And that was so sweet of him, that he really felt that much of a kinship, because we would talk about those composers, Sousa and his marches, and Strauss and his waltzes, and then the other Strauss and his tone poems. It would be really kind of a wide-ranging discussion of all kinds of music.
Damn it, you're going to have to reevaluate your ideas of what satanic music is. It's not rock and roll. Real satanic music is music by Franz Liszt, the Mephisto Waltz, The Ring of the Nibelungen by Wagner, Dance Macabre by Saint-Saëns, Night on Bald Mountain by Mussorgsky, music by Berlioz, music by Rachmaninoff, Debussy, music by contemporary composers. Irving Berlin wrote God Bless America. He also wrote In Your Easter Bonnet, The Easter Parade. But people don't realize that Irving Berlin also wrote Pack Up Your Sins and Go to the Devil. He wrote Stay Down Here Where You Belong, where the devil is talking to his son and telling him that there's more hate up above than there is in hell down below. I think you better start thinking about real satanic influences in music, because that's the kind of music you're going to be hearing, and your children might just be listening to.
We both would discuss how that kind of magic of music was powerful, that it could really reach in and touch your emotions. He would talk about the suicide songs, like Gloomy Monday, would be chord progressions that could be really effective of one's emotions and might either be cathartic or lock somebody into emotions that they are surprised that they get stuck in, that it's such a direct touch. And that kind of power he found when he used to play in the Lost Weekend. People would be there for whatever they're trying to forget. They're drinking, they're having fun, they might be miserable. And he would basically play different tunes to see whether he could push them into maybe more joyous or more morose states. And it was this experiment that he would really test and see how people behaved when different music and different chord progressions were played at them. And he found some fascinating results, and it was his totally a laboratory for him to work that way.
At some point late in the evening, we convened in the kitchen, and he immediately, where he had his keyboards, and he immediately launched into a medley of bullfight pasodobles. And that went on, I would say, or at least 45 minutes. He went from one to another. Many I had never heard before, but I had recognized the rhythm of it as being a pasodoble. And these were dramatic bullfight songs. And then I was just so impressed. And he wasn't even looking at sheet music. This is stuff he had done, he had memorized. And he played everything from memory. And then he launched into The Ride of the Valkyries by Wagner, which is really, you can imagine, was extremely dramatic and wonderful. And he played me the theme song from Treasure of the Sierra Madre. And he said, "You recognize that?" And I said, "No, what was that?" He said, "That's the theme from Treasure of the Sierra Madre." And I said, "Oh," I said, "that was one of my father's favorite films." He said, "Mine too."
Music for him was his ritual. And he later brought in the idea of all the formal ritual trappings that other religions had when he decided to create something that was a religion. He felt, let's take the trappings. But for him, whenever he did ritual in his house, the music was one of the most important aspects. And so that informed everything that he did. His design sense, how he learned things from Mortensen, and his ideas of how space, negative and positive, and all that would affect something aesthetic, he felt that could be applied to a larger aspect of human consciousness. And music certainly does that too. So all of these aspects totally percolated together to be the foundation of Satanism.
Well, when I was a teenager, I was interested in the occult. And the occult in those days meant you got dream books, and you got books on fortune telling and all that sort of thing. And the closest thing there was to anything about calling up spirits or demons and that sort of thing was a lot of gobbledygook where you stood around in a circle and you used the protective names of Jehovah and Jesus and all that. And I tried it. Oh, Lord knows I tried it, but it didn't work. And so I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to call up any demons, if I'm going to get any magical power, if I'm going to get anything going my way, I better get on the side of those guys instead of protecting myself from them. I better allow them to feel that I'm their friend, not somebody that doesn't trust them. You trust me, I trust you. That's the way it has to work. There has to be some trust between people or demons.
Groups of people can reinforce the strength of these ideas if they form like a ceremony or a ritual around them. And so we had our rituals connected with the Church of Satan, which evolved.
You know, you don't need to know everything about how it works to be able to work it and utilize it and use it effectively in the world. And that's what he felt with magic. He couldn't explain all of it because we just don't have the language for it yet, but he knew it worked, and he was practicing and refining techniques, not just in the ritual chamber, but in everyday life. Feeding things in, weaving things in your conversation, in what you think about, in the things around you. That's where total environments come about, is feeding yourself. It's all about feeding your conscious and your unconscious mind, your subconscious mind, to achieve your goals. And that goes on thousands of times a day, not just in the ritual chamber.
He believed in magic as that force, that electricity that you could generate either on your own, if you were emotional enough over something, or with other human beings. You know, in that simplest form of building up that energy and then throwing it out. And, you know, as Blanche has said, at the very least, it makes you feel better. But those of us who have done it and utilize it often recognize that actually it has very real results beyond that.
I found that when I got into my own kind of magic, that is sort of aligning myself or linking myself with the forces or the names. That's where we're getting into names now, or the kind of names you weren't supposed to be friendly to. Then things started going my way a little more, because I wasn't, as I found out, being a hypocrite about it.
He was capable of seeing through New Age folk, witchcraft practitioners, alternative spiritual folk, who would engage in spells and rituals and ceremonies and insist that this was white magic, as if there was something that they had to juxtapose themselves to. And Anton would say, look, you know, white magic is just one more way of hiding from what you really want, which is power. And I think Anton helped open me up to that in a way that felt very relaxing, ultimately, because suddenly there was this sense of honesty in the air, and that was helpful.
Every time he sat down at the keyboard, every time he sat down to write an essay, those were his rituals. He had performed rituals with the magic circle from the time he was a child. He'd connected with those forces.
Occult means hidden, it means secret. The very word indicates something that other people aren't doing. If everybody's doing it, then it's not a cult, it's pop.
These were delightful evenings. Just being in the Black House was a very atmospheric experience. And then the first few times we went in, he would be playing the organ. And then one time he emerged from the hidden fireplace. There was a staircase that he could access and went down into unimaginable treasures down there. So it was a place of, it wasn't a huge mansion. It was, I mean, a fairly large house, but it just had all kinds of secret alcoves.
Well, he was a theatrical person, and so everything he did had that aspect. Like, he would make his appearances at these meetings through the fireplace. There was a fireplace in the room, but actually it dated back to Prohibition, and in the basement was a complete bar, and the access to the bar was through a ladder that went down through the fireplace and ended up in the bar. And so it was a secret Prohibition place during those ridiculous years of the Prohibition.
Well, he had the most wonderful lavatory, and it was decorated in an incredible way. He had a corn cob hanging on the wall from a piece of twine. He had a copy of Jokes for the John hanging from a chain inside his lavatory. His toilet was an old-fashioned pull chain toilet that emptied out from a big tank way above you. And then the piece de la resistance was a little sign on the wall that said, "Smile, you're on candid camera." And I remember my satanic witch friend telling me that she was always worried when she was sitting on that toilet peeing that when she saw that candid camera sign, that maybe Anton had a camera set up in there. She'll never know. I mean, that, I don't think he did, but it was a sign that made you nervous enough to consider that. You know, it was wonderful.
he liked to tease people, especially pompous people. That if anybody was all stuck up or silly or pretentious, he would always throw something at them. Because he said he used to do that even to his earlier Church of Satan members. That he brought this guy in once who was like a short order cook at a diner, and he made hamburgers. They were kind of greasy, but he called them hamburgers. And he talked kind of funny, and he was this odd character. So Doctor brought him into one of their evenings when people were hanging around the house, and he kind of presented him as this sage. And this guy was just a short order cook and barely that. So he would be talking about the hamburgers and how he made them, and then everybody was sitting around kind of going, why is this guy here, and is there some other significance to this? Oh, this must be symbolic of something or whatever, and Doctor would just kind of sit back there and be kind of...
Meeting Anton was really inspiring in the sense that you went into his world. When you went to visit him, you went into his universe, and it was like a parallel universe where he had done that for his whole life and created his own reality, and that was really inspiring to know that there was this sort of secret shadow nighttime world, and there were people that were living in it and sort of simultaneously doing their own thing. It wasn't the same thing, but it was inspiring and encouraging to know that they're out there and to meet more of them.
The idea that Satanism advocates orgies is a convenience that's been used for centuries. I personally don't see any fun in orgies. I witnessed a few, and they're just not my thing. But I suppose if people are interested in orgies, that's all right too. I wouldn't say that it's a prerequisite of Satanism. As a matter of fact, I would say that Epicureanism is more a prerequisite of Satanism. Epicurean sex meaning you're a little bit fussy about sex partners. Anything or anyone doesn't necessarily serve the purpose. Sex is and should be a more personal thing than what it has become.
I loved reading The Satanic Witch because it was new stuff, but not new stuff. It was nothing new, but it was new to me to read it expressed in so many words, and it was very helpful to me as well. That book is a little bit outdated. It's basically just a card catalog of his fetishes, which is fine, but there's sound philosophy in it. And at one point, I brought him a copy to have it signed. And he said, "Oh, the book about you," which I thought was very, very charming. But true, it really is true. And that when I was reading it, that was exactly what I thought. Oh, yeah, I knew that. Yeah, I knew that. Oh, interesting. I never really thought of it that way. So it was very thought-provoking for me.
Because I had always gotten sort of criticism because I'd always been, very feminine. And then when I became a teenager, it's another dimension to that. And, so then I'd be, why do you wear, why do you have to look so sexy? Why do you wear, your dress is tight? Why do you wear all that makeup? But I was doing it just out of my natural way of being. That's just the way that I was. And my parents were sort of, not the hippie generation, but just after. And their aesthetic was very different, and they didn't really understand. So when I cracked open that book and I read it, I was like, see, I'm right. I'm right, this is me. So a lot of it was very natural for me.
This was back '66, he started the organization, and before that he had his witches workshops, teaching women how to bend men's mind to their will, owning your power. And I get frustrated with people now dismissing him as being ancient, heteronormative and misogynistic, which is a complete lie.
I'm against sexual guidebooks, the things that make a job out of sex, not even a pastime, but a chore. And sex should be something that's wonderful. It should be something that's exhilarating. It should be something that's relaxing.
Some people see the Complete Witch as sort of a backlash to Yeah, it was all about Twiggy and sort of women dressed in their father's oversized clothes and trying to be men, trying to own masculinity. And the doctor saw that that was not the way to go, you know, that women have power and that they should utilize what power they have, that women always have power, that it's the women who make the decisions, that it's up to them how much they want men to feel empowered to, and you know, from the very outset, he said that a leader's best friend is always a woman, and my right-hand man will always be a woman, because a woman can do what a man cannot do. And he, in his description in The Complete Witch, The Satanic Witch, of the demonic, he said that that's an expression of the male's or the female's other self, you know, and you are attracted to someone who expresses some demonic within you that you can't express. For example, he himself, being a very sort of dark, mystical, Ming the Merciless sort of affectation on the exterior, he liked a sort of very curvy, very gum-popping mall type, you know, some sort of bouncy blonde, smart-talking woman that could take charge and really call it as she sees it, you know. And he said, I would be that woman, but I look terrible in heels.
Sex is an interesting subject. Obviously, people have been sort of inspired by it, motivated by it. In fact, I believe, as a Freudian, and also a very strong supporter of the theories of Wilhelm Reich, that sex is not the answer to everything, but it's probably the prime mover to a great deal of what we do. And I believe sex should be enjoyed. It should be participated in with a great deal of gusto, even if you're just participating in it by yourself.
I found it an empowering book. I don't understand why feminists have an issue with it, unless they haven't read it, because it's basically saying no matter what type you are, no matter what you look like, no matter, you know, it's great, it's fine, you're perfect for somebody, for a for some situation. And that it also teaches you how to manipulate. You know, they complain about men manipulating women, but I mean, it's a great book for teaching women how to manipulate men. You know, so yeah, I still think it's ahead of its time.
Sex is permissible in any way, shape, or form, so long as it's with consenting adults and with the understanding that those who partake of it are going to enjoy it in some form, whatever form it may take, and they're going to come away from it better off, not worse off. Then sex will have achieved its ultimate goal, and that is not just simply procreation of the race, but to build a happier, more content, and more satisfied race.
He understood the power that women have, and he wanted to encourage that, celebrate it. As the Church of Satan celebrated homosexuality, asexuality, bisexuality, transsexuality, not as a tolerance, but as a celebration. And that's what is a cornerstone. I mean, that's foundational in Satanism from the very beginnings.
My relationships with some of the sex goddesses of the past have been largely as a result of luck more than anything else. However, in the case of Jane Mansfield, she was an active member of the Church of Satan, and certainly under tragic circumstances left the Church of Satan. And the untimely, tragic death of Miss Mansfield was certainly not due to any curse on my part. It was as a result of intervention on the part of her attorney in the affairs between myself and Miss Mansfield. And I'm much poorer as a result of her loss. She was a lovely person, and I miss her very much. And the situation concerning Miss Monroe, that was a long, long time ago, long before the Church of Satan. However, she did have an unswerving interest in the dark side of life. And I think that was one of the main reasons that we managed to hit it off the way we did.
LaVey's Satanism is a cluster, not only of philosophy, but also of aesthetics. It's an aesthetic not only dimly lit in gothic horror gaslight or garish circus light bulbs. The evocative shadow world of German expressionist cinema and early Hollywood horror films, not forgetting the stark contrasts of film noir, deeply influenced the young LaVey. The lighting and composition theories of American photographer William Mortensen became almost an obsession, and LaVey integrated many of Mortensen's ideas into the designs and performances of various Church of Satan rituals. And then, of course, there was the cinematic satanic masterpiece, Todd Browning's Freaks from 1932.
It was certainly a satanic film insofar as retribution and the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth kind of attitude on the part of these misshapen, monstrous creatures, these sideshow oddities that were essentially the heroes of the film.
They, of course, were always interested in the movie, and Dwayne Esper was also involved in that movie as part of its checkered career, being revived and re-revived and lost and revived again. And Anton was also involved in this as well, and the whole lore surrounding the film. And, of course, has in his occupation as an organist at movie theaters and grindhouses. He came in contact with these kind of films.
It disappeared. It was like a banned movie. It was an unseen movie. And Anton LaVey, with his love of the carnival and circuses, certainly enjoyed that. I enjoyed that film, and I believe he was instrumental in reviving it. I don't really know the details. I can't really speak knowledgeably about that, though. But I certainly believe him. I don't see why not. He was really well connected with circus people, and from his own work in the circus and in the carnival, and these carnies and circus folks were always visiting him, and what do they call it? Cutting up jackpots with him. That's their language that you use when they tell stories about their adventures.
I always liked his stories about playing the organ at these grindhouses and this mixture of live music and movies and sort of, striptease and sort of this very dark aspect of movies, what movies were all about at that time, B-movies, exploitation movies in this very grindhouse vein, which of course is now completely gone. That lower end of movies is completely gone, and now people are watching movies on YouTube and they don't get the experience, which is sometimes the best thing you can get out of it. So he harkened back to that. He was a living relic of that, and not a relic, but very much alive, and his memories were alive and stories were alive. So, but he was the last link to this kind of. I mean, he played in the 40s and 50s, I believe, in these theaters.
We never talked about Satanism. Never talked about the devil, never talked about witchcraft. But we did talk about our favorite directors, our favorite movies, the books that those movies are based on in some cases, like, of course, Nightmare Alley, which probably everybody by now knows is one of his very favorite books and movies. I mean, it always comes back to Nightmare Alley. And frankly, from the films that we talked about that were some of his favorites, it does seem like if you really want to get some idea of Anton's aesthetic, just go to 1947 and watch all of the movies on the list. I mean, and there were some great ones back then. And of course, Nightmare Alley, but Out of the Past, Brute Force. I mean, those were all from 1947 as well.
Certain other films that are not horror films per se, but certainly fine films exhibiting a Luciferian or a satanic characterization. The films noir of the 1940s personify the satanic in films, and we're getting certainly a return to that kind of film. The classics, of course, are well known. The films that were based on Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett stories, but some that weren't quite so well known. A little thing called The Gangster with Barry Sullivan, certainly one of the most satanic portrayals ever on film.
Yeah, I do think Anton enjoyed the film noir, particularly, and partly for the reason that they weren't black and white. Well, they were in black and white, but they didn't present black and white solutions to things. The hero could be the bad guy, you know, this gun for hire. He's a killer, but he's also the protagonist. And I think that appealed to Anton a lot, because I think he recognized that you can't look at the world in this really simple, cut and dry approach that is still foisted on us a lot. It's kind of, you know, this is good, this is bad here, and I still see it today. Nothing's much changed except the films are in color now.
He's put himself in front of the camera a few times. Certainly that Joe Pine interview he did was absolutely terrific. I saw that. I watched that from time to time. It's always great. He's always so well-spoken when he's put on the spot by somebody like Joe Pine, who's antagonistic to begin with, you know, tries to ridicule what he believes and everything else, and LaVey just fires right back at him.
But originally, you're a bad cat. Well, you have to be bad to be good, don't you? Is it true that you teach people how to make voodoo dolls and stick pins in them to hurt people?
That's right. I believe that hate is necessary in a controlled way just as much as love is necessary.
But could it really work?
Of course it works. It's been working in primitive societies for a long, long time.
Well, then how come you don't pick out the despots of the world and make dolls like that and stick pins in them so that the... Oh, you want them to win. You want the bad guys to win, right?
Well, I don't say they're necessarily the bad guys or the good guys. It's not up to me, because the only people that I would cast a curse or a spell on would be people individually that would sort of get under my skin.
Why are you staring at me like that?
Because after all, hate should be a personalized thing.
Do you hate a lot?
No, not really. I am a pretty flexible person.
Sometimes people don't know what to do with Anton LaVey, because they think, well, was he really serious? Did he believe what he believed, or was he just posturing to try to make money or something? Well, if he was trying to posture to make money, he really wasn't very good at it, because he didn't market the T-shirts and the posters and the, you know, he didn't franchise like he could have.
So it became, I think, at some point fashionable to attack him or to disbelieve him or to not really grasp what he was about, basically. And then also from other Satanist groups, they considered him a charlatan in some way because he was a man of show business.
There's going to be one person in every studio audience that has read the Satanic Bible and knows what the book really is all about, and is going to think, they're lying, these people up there. That's not what the Satanic Bible says. And what makes it worse, these people who deride or who criticize the Satanic Bible as being influential in all sorts of crimes, they're the kind of people that probably haven't read it, or if they have read it, they're bold-faced liars.
As easy as it is to explain what this counter-tradition is about, people still have trouble getting their arms around it. And yet, there's also no question in my mind that there are wonderful, wonderful kids growing up in the United States, in Europe, in other parts of the world, who are just burning with a spirit of rebellion and nonconformity, who feel that there is something Potemkin, something fake, something ersatz about this world of ours, and they're trying to break through to something else. And for some of those kids or older people, when they hear that term satanic, they feel they've found something. They feel they found something pure and something that's not compromised. And I think that's true. So the price of using the term is being misunderstood, but the payment of using the term is that it's uncorrupted, it's pure. And it's so ironic because people think of it as corruption, and it's the ultimate uncorrupted term because it will never be safe and sanitized by the corporate media. It will never be safe and sanitized by all the forces of consumerism that try to repackage rebellion for money. You can't touch this term.
It doesn't bother me because I have no axe to grind with Christianity. I feel that if Christians are good Christians, they want to be Christians, fine, if it's working for them. Same with any other religion. The only thing that I would preach would be that people that aren't successfully enjoying their lives as much as they should might sort of flip the coin over and see what's on the other side.
But the misrepresentation, I think, was on the part of people who actually could look at the philosophy and realize that it was something that could be attractive beyond the trappings, and that made them feel threatened, that they really didn't want to see that supported or communicated clearly because it could undercut what they were doing.
The concept of God has given the world much beautiful music, many beautiful works of art, and certainly I feel God exists, but the name for God, of course, is different for many different people, and I feel that God is that force, whatever God one chooses to pray to or to command. In the case of Satanism, rather than pray, I feel whatever God exists should be the God that carries a person along, that carries them through, that makes them a better person, that makes them live a better life, and naturally a more pleasant life. So, and I feel that you have to be kind to yourself, indulgent to yourself, before you know what it's like to be kind to others.
He challenged Christianity. That is the biggest of all, and gave a home to all of the alien elite who felt that they had no home. And you know, I don't just say the broken toys of the world. Those two, but he also gave a nod to everyone who didn't quite feel like they fit. And you know, and that's true today. You know, anyone who is out of the norm, you know, their sexual proclivity is different, you know, gay, straight, trans, they're all accepted. No one really cares. You know, if you're a Satanist, indulge in your pleasure. It's about pleasure. He gave America the right to pleasure.
There are a few trigger words that seemingly always bring a jolt in any conversation. There is the C word, there is the N word, and then there's that dreaded S word, Satan. Satan may not mean so much in a cultivated, secular society, but talk to any primitive Christian and they'll react as if Satan actually exists as some kind of anthropomorphic monster. LaVey knew how easily provoked his fellow Americans could be and decided to press that button, thereby getting negative attention from reactive monotheistic simpletons, but also positive attention from people who could see beyond the jolt and who used the very word as a provocative bullshit detector. Anton LaVey had found a method that worked, mixing showbiz shock tactics with clever demagogic strategies.
Because it's fun, for one thing. It sounds good, it feels good, and it means the opposition. And it's been associated for a long time with all that has turned out to be not only progressive, innovative, pioneering, rebellious, productive, everything that's ever been, everything that's ever started has been considered a tool of the devil that has turned out to be substantial or significant in the development of man.
There were plenty of people that told Anton LaVey from the very beginning, before he even wrote the book, well, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but why don't you just call it something other than Satanism? You know, that's going to put a lot of people off. You'll get a lot more followers if you just call it even Luciferianism or, you know, Belial or something, you know, Leviathan, not quite so controversial. But that's kind of the point. That's kind of the point. If you can't get past the S word, yes, it's loaded with a lot of baggage that's been given to you since you sat on your mother's knee in church. You know, that is a loaded word, and he didn't want to use anything else. He didn't want to water it down. He wanted it to be a thunk over the head for people, because if you are reacting to that word, think of all the other trigger words that are being sold to you or given to you or you're being used by. It's that language. Language is a potent thing.
That his timing was perfect, because it was a time in society where the rebel was heralded. Even Hugh Hefner, the publisher and editor of Playboy, founder of Playboy, where I worked for a number of years, had written his own Beatitudes at one time, his own version of the Beatitudes, and one of them was, "Blessed is the rebel, for without him there'd be no progress." So LaVey was the quintessential rebel, and the timing couldn't have been better in a time that loved rebels. So, and who is the arch rebel? Satan. So it all fit. It all fit.
He'll be taken seriously by anybody who bothers to read him. I think the people who pay attention to all of the satanic panic hysteria and stuff will always be deluded and be getting secondhand information that is just sensational and ridiculous. And that's always going to be the case. You know, the general public is not very bright. As LaVey would say, their bulbs don't burn very brightly, you know.
The semantic definition of Satan, of course, has always been the opposer, or that which is deviant from popular thought. As a result of that, of course, Satanism has always appealed to people who are misfits, it has been thought at least, and probably there is a sort of genetic predisposition towards Satanism among people who consider themselves a bit alienated. And I would say definitely Satan is a very real force to be reckoned with, and the semantic term or the definition of Satan definitely is what I feel and certainly practice as Satanism, and that is opposition to popular trends, opposition to givens, or to what happen to be the thoughts that are not questioned or not to be questioned. If that represents Satanism, then certainly I would say Satan is the champion of all unpopular thought.
I think that was part of his formula, you know, 99% respectability and 1% outrage, right? That was the outrage. Because he was well-spoken and he was obviously intelligent and he was personable, and anyone who met him liked him, very charismatic. And yet there is that S word. I mean, that is the thing that everybody has a problem with. Why don't you just call it humanism? Why don't you just, you know, it would be so much, you'd reach so many more people, but that isn't the point. You know, it's a stratification, as we were talking about earlier. And I think the S word is part of that stratification. You know, if you can get past that, only a certain kind of person will.
By adopting the mantle of Satanism, he, I'm sure knowingly, was treading those waters and was going to get those kind of reactions. And those people aren't interested in subtleties or looking beneath the surface and seeing what he's actually saying. So as soon as they hear that word or think about that imagery, it's colored by their own views and attitudes and colored by usually a Christian background and often medieval fantasies, quasi-pornographic images that are, of course, lurid and titillating to them at the same time as they're horrified by them.
I think it was definitely Satan, that he represented Satan, that he was often depicted by writers and journalists as like the personification of Satan on earth. That's definitely the thing that got him the negative sort of publicity, because in actuality he was an incredibly charming person. He had dozens and dozens of friends. He had friends that remained loyal to him to their deaths, even when he was kind of retreating from the world a bit and not really answering phone messages or mail. These people would keep writing to him, because I've seen their messages to him. Tony, can we have lunch? Tony, how are you doing out there? Tony, there was a big earthquake. How are you and the family? He inspired a lot of friendship and devotion and loyalty. He was charming. So without Satan, he probably would have been, he could have been the mayor of San Francisco for all I know.
We as a human species have in common this basic myth of an opposing force. And Anton performed a brilliant and penetrating resurrection of this idea as one that wasn't evil or maleficent in any traditional sense, but was an idea that embodies the energies of the rebel, the revolutionary, the romantic, the usurper, even the emancipator.
Satan is exciting, either pro or con, but Satan is exciting. You throw a boulder into the pond with Satanism. If you just are an atheist, it's a pebble. And that was the impact that was necessary. That there are so many people who are different kinds of atheists and humanists, and very few of them had the kind of immediate worldwide impact that Anton LaVey achieved just by putting on that horned headpiece and standing in front of the sigil of Baphomet and raising a sword and going, "Hail Satan!" Like, that shattered everybody. It blasted the doors open and demanded to be paid attention to.
Being at the Black House was a multi-sensory, multi-dimensional experience. I always had the impression that things were being said not only in straight conversation, but that there were also things being transmitted between the lines. LaVey always chose his musical pieces carefully. Everyone was served a different plate of seemingly random musical treats. And then there was the library in the purple parlor. During one session he took out Ben Hecht's Fantasius Malere and A Guide for the Bedeviled and read to me, solemnly imbuing it with real meaning. I realized much later how much it had actually affected me, as Ben Hecht has been a very important figure of inspiration for me throughout the decades. My friend Adam Parfrey, whose publishing company Feral House published LaVey's later collections of essays, The Devil's Notebook and Satan Speaks, often recounted how his meetings with LaVey had given him fodder and ideas for many book projects that now continue to influence culture.
LaVey left a lot of clues for people. He was actually a voracious reader and a voracious follower of obscure cultural trends, artifacts, personalities. He was really a sort of historian of the underworld. And so he would leave little clues in things like the dedication list in the Satanic Bible, or in his essays he'd mention obscure people, or in the Satanic Witch, the bibliography is like it's like a geological mine that you can go into and find all kinds of previously unknown gems and bring them back up to the light, really obscure things. And he mentioned in the dedication list of the Satanic Bible William Mortensen, the photographer, and he talked about the command to look. And so I picked up on that, and as many people do, you sort of research that list of names at the beginning of the Satanic Bible, and Mortensen stuck in my head. Adam Parfrey was visiting from Farrell House here in Vermont, and I had an old photographer friend who was a classic photographer who was over for dinner that night, a few friends, and after the dinner I just said, Adam, have you looked at these Mortensen books lately? You know, they're incredible. They're just these sort of banal sounding ones are actually filled with weird stuff. And Adam said, oh, I think I know what you mean. Yeah, I've got some of those. And I pulled out the stack of them I had, and we all started looking at them and were amazed by them. And I said to Adam, you know, Farrell House really should do a Mortensen book. And he said, oh, I've always wanted to, but I've never been able to pull it together. But it's always been an idea, and I've talked to a few people about it before. And I said, well, look at this stuff. Like, it's begging to happen. And Adam said, well, do you want to do it? Do you want to work with me on it? If you want to do that, I'll do it. And so we did the coffee table book, American Grotesque. And we did a new edition of Command to Look, for which I wrote a whole essay about the LaVeyan connection to Mortensen, investigating that in, I think, about as much detail as you possibly can. And that's a sort of an appendix afterward to the book. It's quite lengthy. So that's now part of my life. And Mortensen's having a renaissance kind of in the wake of those projects, and I'm just, it's only sad that Anton wasn't around to see them, because they definitely bear his stamp.
I think he planted things in people that he saw that they could appreciate, that they could bring something to fruition, because he often said, you know, that he never was going to live long enough to do all the things that he wanted to do. And so by having these different people that were doing all of these different things, and maybe even people like me who at the time, you know, I was just figuring out exactly who I was and what I was going to be doing, you know, but because of his influence and things that he planted in there later on, I could draw from that.
Being a Satanist and being involved with Satanism for so many years now, of course the culmination of that, the pinnacle, if you will, was me being able to write The Satanic Warlock, which is now part of the canon, which in my wildest dreams, I never thought that would happen, but it did. And matter of fact, when I did meet with Dr. LaVey for that time, I said to him, why is there not a counterpart to The Complete Witch, or The Satanic Witch as it became? He goes, well, no one has decided to write it. And he said, why don't you write it?
My philosophy and his philosophy, we just agreed with each other. I didn't need to read a book to know that I agreed with him. And I've told this story before, but eventually I did read the Satanic Bible. And on a subsequent visit, I said, hey, you know, I read a book. And he's like, oh, really? Which book did you read? And I said, oh, it's this thing called the Satanic Bible. And he said, wow, what'd you think of it? And I said, I don't know, I probably could have written it myself. I kind of liked it. It was basically, you know, my own thing. And he loved that. And I know people like to bash on him and say that he was an egomaniac, or that he didn't have room for other people's ideas. But at that moment, if he was a jerk, he would have been angry. He would have been resentful, and he would have wanted to keep a distance between him and me, and that we would have these roles, that he's the guy and he's the the teacher, and I'm the pupil. I never felt like that. We were always equal, and he was tickled pink that I could have written that myself.
During our conversations, he showed that he was that guy that I saw in his writing, that he was charming and he was witty and he was friendly and he was curious. And he'd ask questions of me about things that I knew about, and we shared topics that we had of mutual interest, and we'd kind of suss each other out to see what we each knew about these topics, and it was kind of always fun to see that we had very similar information about a lot of things. And we left that the next morning kind of feeling like we had met like the best uncle you could possibly ever have.
One of the times we were visiting, it was always kind of a sad moment when we'd be leaving the house for the last time. We knew we'd be, you know, hitting the airport soon. And he gave me a hug, and he pulled me in really close, and he put his mouth near my ear, and he said, "You do everything right." And I mean, who doesn't want to hear that from a parental figure? And it's like, whenever I have, you know, my down moments, or, you know, question what I'm doing and where things are going, I just try to remember and hear his voice in my ear. You do everything right.
Anton LaVey and I worked together on the concept of the total environment And if I influenced him, I'm happy about that, and he certainly influenced me. He showed me that people can work together to create something, and that it is a positive thing to have other people involved.
The future of Satanism is assured. There's nothing I can say or do that's going to retard it or advance it. The die has been cast. The show's on the road. Everyone is just sort of waiting to see what's going to happen. A great deal has been done in the last few years without a great deal of fanfare concerning Satanism. Now suddenly it's become a topic of conversation. It's become a household word. I realize that. This is all according to plan. I haven't come forth in a great many years because I didn't want to be relegated to another guest on a TV talk show. But I can assure you, Satanism is here to stay.
Anton LaVey's legacy is everywhere forever. You can't unring a bell. You know, there are people who, whether or not they realize it, are taking advantage of the road that he paved, of the path that he made, the left-hand path, whatever. But the path that he paved, because there's so much more freedom now. We're free to do what we want to do and say what we want to say. Satanism is a recognized religion, which I think is important, but it's also completely irrelevant because it's about personal and individual freedom, and just the idea that you're free to have these thoughts and have this personal philosophy and develop all of these ideas and live your life on your own terms. That's all Satanism. And you can call it Tony Robbins, you can call it whatever, but they all owe a great debt to Anton LaVey for stepping up and saying, you know, this is what I like, this is what I'm going to do, and these things are all possible. And the only thing stopping you is you. So if you get out of your own way and you decide this is what I want to do, and this is how I want to live, and this is what I want to say, and this is how I want to dress, do it.
What Anton did with the Church of Satan and the Satanic Bible was in so many ways unprecedented. And that's why it's very difficult to plug Anton into any category. As soon as you say, well, he belongs to ceremonial magic, there are too many differences. As soon as you say, well, he's objectivism with pentagrams, he was so much more than that. As soon as you say, well, you know, Anton was kind of a performance artist. Well, he was also a social thinker. He was also an occult thinker. He was also an esoteric thinker. There's no category that will hold him. So he has always remained this outsider in the American occult scene. He's almost this satellite off on its own, revolving around what's going on, drawing in other people and ideas and movements. But he was very much, it seems to me, a freestanding figure. Very unclassifiable, very difficult to categorize, which in a way is the ultimate tribute to what he accomplished.
He codified the way I think many people, probably most people, actually live, but won't admit it. He codified that in this concise, slim book and wrapped it all around with occult mystery, and it was an intoxicating combination.
Those meetings with Anton LaVey impacted my life in a positive way, and ensured that far-out ideas can thrive and be expressed quite freely and still not be oppressed by other people.
I hope that his work continues to stay in print and gives people the freedom that he wanted them to have. He truly felt that his philosophy was one that freed people. It made them free. And it made them happy because it allowed them to be who they really were.
Death is the only equalizer, the only thing that makes all men equal. I have a painting from long ago, and it's called Equality, and it's a boneyard of skulls. And on each skull is the hat of kings, millionaires, gamblers, Indian chiefs, just about every conceivable kind of headdress. And there's a little frog that's looking up at all of these skulls, who is equal to all of them at that point. And if it seems I'm a bit morbid about these sort of things, it's really because I love life very much. And it's been said that I can't possibly love life, that I'm a very unhappy man, or must be a very unhappy man. And I would say that I'm a very happy man, an extremely happy man, in a compulsively unhappy world.
You know, in all areas of the arts and music, everywhere, you'll find the Satanist who's just kicking ass, killing it. You know, I think he would be amazed to see some of the parties that we've had, some of the conferences, the BrockenCon, and you know, the books that have been written, movies made, and what you're doing today. I mean, this is all part of LaVey's legacy. This moment would not have happened without him.
One of my favorite things that always caught me off guard was his smile, because here you had this man who could look very serious and very imposing, but if you made him smile, or if something made him smile or laugh, he suddenly looked like a 10-year-old boy. And it was always disarming, you know. Yeah, there's nobody like him.
I guess I miss knowing that there's a colorful character like that, and there's so few and far between. It's very rare that you meet somebody who really has a magical persona, that it's not just ideology or talk, or they've done a few interesting things. LaVey, when you met him in person, you knew you'd met somebody totally unique, who had created his own reality, and that's an incredibly rare thing, actually. And the older you get, you realize how rare it is. So those kind of people are so few and far between, and it's so special when you do happen to encounter one and spend any amount of time with them, even just minutes. It sort of changes your perspective on things, and I would say actually renews your faith in humanity a little bit, which is interesting, because LaVey was very much a misanthrope who didn't have much use for the vast majority of humanity.
He was a man of deep conviction, and through all of his misanthropy, I would have to say he was an idealist, or else he never would have done what he did. He believed that, you know, like he said, I'm a happy man in a compulsively unhappy world, and he did his damnedest to try to point people in the right direction toward celebration and happiness and enjoyment of this life here and now, because as far as we know, this is all we get. And you better make it a damn fine party.
He was like a little kid always. His eyes would light up and he'd just be thrilled, and we could go off into rapturous discussions about all these different details of things that like he knew or I knew, and we could share things. That kind of sharing that we had that I thought was just so warm, and again, two minds meeting, that we could share so many things that was missed that so much, and that I still come up with things that I see and going, I just wish he was here, that I could just let him see this or let him hear this, that I think that he would have been so happy.
I miss his humor. I miss that there's so many times when things come up and I said, oh my God, would Doctor have laughed his butt off at this? you know, or oh boy, just this guy's name would have made him crack up, you know, because he loved that thing where a person has a name that totally suits like the silly thing that they're doing, you know, or their crazy position in life. And, you know, he loved things like that. He loved corny jokes. He would have loved the irony of so much of what's going on in the world today. And it makes me sad when I realize that, you know, I can't tell him about that anymore.
Well, I miss having a friend who was very well read. He had a wonderful library and articulate in his views about the occult and what could be called popularly magic. And I'm fortunate to have known him, and I wish he was still around. I never had to recount my feeling about him and saying, well, he turned out to be a monster, because that wasn't so. He was a very thoughtful and creative person, and he was one of the great friendships of my life.
He was my world. He was everything. And I remember when the incident happened in '95, and going up and down the hallways, and the doctors told me, we don't know how much functionality he will regain. Physically, mentally, it was a hard blow, and I was wheeling Xerxes back and forth in his stroller and thinking, what was the last joke he told me? What was the last piece of music that I heard him play? And these are the things that are important to you. You know, his voice, his smile, his touch, holding me, being with me.
It's difficult to say what anyone's single contribution is to anyone's life. I don't know. I miss him. I don't know, maybe he just really brought out my bullshit detector, which I'm grateful for.